Hello, my name is Mario Sullivan, and I'm the chair-elect of the Civil Rights and Social Justice section of the American Bar Association. Thank you for joining us today for the ABA Civil Rights Social Justice Program, How Things Work, the Legal Edition, which is a rapid response project that addresses how our civil rights are being impacted by actions taken by the new administration. These videos are a unique opportunity to address what is happening in America today, clarifying any misinformation or disinformation being spread. And today's topic, the power of protest, is more critical than ever. In today's political climate, it is essential to examine how these issues intersect with the principles of justice and equity and that guide our work in our section and the ABA generally. Today, we are honored to have with us attorney Brad Thomson, a National Lawyers Guild member. His expertise and dedication to civil rights work have made him a leader in this field, including representing protesters. We are grateful for your willingness to share your insights and experience with us today. Now, we've seen movements change the course of our history, political policies, and the hearts and minds of a nation. So, Brad, can you just tell us a little bit about how we're seeing in this current political climate an increase in the number of protests, and are they effective anymore?
Yes. Hi, Mario. Thank you for having me. We have been seeing an increase in protests over the last several months in response of a number of different policies and actions we've been seeing by this current administration. History has shown us that protests play an essential role in social movements, and that's not just in this country, but it's around the world. They can certainly still be effective, though the impact of a single protest is often hard to quantify. But we do see that protests over time, as part of broader social movements, really do have a strong impact in governmental policy, in creating social change, in changing public opinion. And so it's as important now as ever for people to be protesting, demonstrating, speaking out, particularly where we're seeing authoritarianism and egregious abuses of government power, especially at the federal level.
Indeed. What are some of the main goals that you think that are coming out of the protests these days?
Yeah, so broadly, the goal of a protest is to create some sort of social change. And that can look a couple different ways. That can mean trying to raise awareness to a particular issue so that more of the members of the general public are informed about what's happening. And that can be either through direct interaction, actually rallying, demonstrating, having people in the street see you. That can also mean getting media attention around these demonstrations so that it can get to an even broader audience. Part of that can also be changing public opinion, to be trying to be persuasive, to make arguments, and to be doing that in a collective atmosphere with a group of people. Protests can also be trying to put pressure on institutions of power, and that can be either public or private institutions. That can be trying to influence a governmental agency to change a policy, or targeting a specific elected official or series of elected individuals. That can be trying to influence a broad public policy, or can be particular specific pieces of legislation. Can also mean trying to put pressure on an individual or private institution like a business or corporation to be changing policies there. And these actions can be broad or symbolic, sending general messages with a sort of broad tent. That can be something like we saw with the No Kings protest recently, or maybe more direct action where the protest itself is really trying to achieve the goal itself, really sort of implementing it. So that's what some of the actions we've seen against ICE deportations, for example, of actually people physically putting their bodies on the line to try to prevent these attacks on the immigrant community.
Yep. And I've attended a few of these protests myself, and we've seen them kind of progress into different ones, just like you mentioned, the LA ICE protest. What are our rights as a protester when we go to these types of events? If I was to be detained or something like that, luckily mine was not a confrontational protest, but we've seen the LA ones get pretty heated lately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our constitutional rights apply at the protest, and so it's largely the First Amendment and Fourth Amendment that really define our rights demonstrations and public protest. As everyone knows, First Amendment that protects speech, assembly, right to petition the government. And so those are the three primary rights that we have that sort of define what we can do. And that generally looks in traditional forms that can be rallies, marches, picket lines, and those typically happen on places that are the archetypes for public forums. Places that through time immemorial have been utilized by individuals and groups of people to demonstrate. So those are streets, sidewalks, public parks. We've also seen other forms of protest and demonstration. So that can be such as occupations, encampments, blockades, or other forms of direct action that might have different legal implications. And that depends on what kind of property it's taking place on and what other sorts of restrictions there might be that could apply there. Now, in terms of your right to be free from detention or arrest, that's the same Fourth Amendment rights that apply to protests that apply outside of a protest. So, the police don't have a right to detain you or see without reasonable suspicion that you're committing a crime. They don't have a right to arrest you without probable cause that you have committed a crime or about to commit a crime. So just because people are demonstrating publicly at a protest, even if there's activity at that protest where some other individuals might be doing something illegal, that doesn't give the police the right to necessarily detain and arrest all the individuals there, and don't give them the right to arrest somebody in particular without probable cause.
Great. You mentioned there are some limits that government can put on protests. What specific limits or boundaries can a government entity put on a protest?
Right. Generally, those are the time, place, and manner restrictions. So that means that the government can limit where protests take place, when they take place, and how they take place. So that can mean placing limitations on a particular date that somebody's trying to organize a protest. If that is going to be conflicting with another major event that might bring more crowds to the area, the government might attempt to restrict that on that date. It can be the time of day, so there can be restrictions about how late a demonstration can take place. Also, noise restrictions. And that can also look like what particular park or street that a demonstration can take place on. And these are very highly specific, and there's a lot of considerations that go into each individual one. And this is an important role that lawyers can play, is in terms of minimizing those restrictions. And that can be either on the front end, where if organizers are looking to negotiate with the police or obtain a permit, that lawyers can play a role there, or it can be something on the back end where if there's been some sort of arrest or some sort of restriction that's taken place, that there can be a post-action civil litigation to challenge that. And that's an important place that lawyers can be active.
I know you mentioned a little bit kind of what the police can do or not do. What happens when the law enforcement breaks up a protest if it's becoming disruptive? And what happens if you are arrested or detained during a protest, whether it's in a protest that's been peaceful or one that's become a bit more disruptive?
So the information that's generally shared is people have the right to remain silent, and that's typically something that's broadly considered best practices. You have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney. The first thing to address is really if there's any criminal charges that result from the case. Sometimes police may arrest people at a demonstration and they're released without being charged. Sometimes they are charged, and we see in the National Lawyers Guild the typical charges we see are things like blocking traffic, disorderly conduct, sometimes resisting arrest, things like that. And so if somebody's facing charges from a protest, it's important to find a lawyer. And, if people qualify for the public defender, that's a great option. If people don't qualify for the public defender and are looking to hire a private attorney, they can look for attorneys that have experience in these areas. And in the National Lawyers Guild, particularly locally in Chicago, we have trained attorneys that are volunteers to take protest cases to represent people when they're charged in these crimes. So, I would encourage people to look in the bar associations, the National Lawyers Guild, or otherwise to find attorneys there. After criminal cases are resolved, if there's or if there are no criminal cases, and there's also the option of a potential civil suit. Like I said, if people are arrested without probable cause, that's a violation of their First Amendment rights, or their First Amendment and their Fourth Amendment rights. If they're engaged in public protest and they're arrested for no reason, that can violate both the First and the Fourth Amendment. So you can bring civil lawsuits for violations there. You also, depending on the jurisdiction, may be able to contact the agency itself for some sort of civilian review or internal investigation. Here in Chicago, we have the COPAs, the name of the agency. And so, this is again an important area where lawyers can be involved and provide these services to people who are out there speaking out and opposing injustice.
So if I wanted to organize a protest, what would be some suggestions or things that you think I should be aware of as I'm planning this type of protest, in order to make it as civil as possible? I know there are a lot of things that are kind of out of the control, especially with protests, and sometimes there are mitigating factors like military being called in and things like that that just escalate things. But what would be some of the suggestions or tips that you would give someone planning to do a protest on some sort of policy or something the administration is doing?
Yeah, so I would encourage organizers to really determine what their goals are, and not just their goals and their tactics, what they're hoping to achieve, how they're trying to demonstrate it, but really also their risk level, because organizers have a number of decisions they can make that can bring a higher or lower risk of legal consequences. As you said, there's things that are outside of their control. Often we see law enforcement violating people's rights, regardless of what people are doing. But, organizers can choose to obtain a permit or not obtain a permit. They can choose to negotiate with police or not. And each of these decisions comes with a level of risk. And, there's also the option that we see organizers engaging in civil disobedience, when they take actions knowing that it's likely to result in arrest. So, I'd really encourage organizers to think through those things, discuss that amongst themselves as a group. And if people are organizing for a first time, really try to find other organizers in the area that have done this previously. Find out how police might react to things. Find out what sort of steps they've taken that have been most effective to achieve those goals that might match the goals of the demonstration that you're trying to organize.
What kind of protesters do you, I'm sorry, what can protesters do to protect themselves legally, especially if they fear there's going to be some sort of retaliation from the protests?
We do see retaliation from law enforcement. That's particularly government officials or um, other sorts of agencies that are state actors. But we also see retaliation from private actors. That can be employers, or that can be organizations that are opposed to whatever policies that you're advocating for, or other private individuals. So people should be very conscious in their own risk level, being thoughtful about what information they're sharing about themselves online and how that information may be used against them. And there's a number of resources out there, particularly the Electronic Frontier Foundation is an organization that provides information about digital security, so people can be aware of what sort of information is being shared by carrying around their cell phone or what apps they use. So really thinking through those things and knowing what their steps are. And depending on the jurisdiction, if people are facing retaliation, whether that's for First Amendment retaliation or some other sort of step that they might be able to do. And there's legal steps there, really depending on the specific facts and depending on the jurisdiction.
All very good suggestions. As we kind of are seeing things emerging and changing in this current legal climate, are you seeing any sort of trends or concerns that activists should be aware of as we're planning future protests?
Yes, we are seeing with the attacks on immigrants, we're seeing people that appear to be federal agents who are not identifying themselves, not sharing, not presenting warrants. It creates a intense amount of fear, and it really makes it difficult, if not impossible, to really hold government officials accountable there when they're refusing to identify themselves. So that's something that we've seen really concerning. We've also seen a number of concerning steps with universities, that there's really this administration's taking huge attacks on universities. So professors, faculty, students are really at higher risk of retaliation there, just for simply speaking out, just for simply exercising their First Amendment rights. And that's a huge concern. And we're also seeing increased abuse of power at the federal level. So we're seeing prosecutions at by the U.S. Attorney's Office in various jurisdictions for demonstrations that typically would have been, if there was any arrests, would have only been low-level misdemeanors by a local entity. But we're now seeing these charges being brought as federal felonies and even being brought against elected officials. And that's a really concerning trend. And that's why it's so important for lawyers to be getting involved right now. And that can be us as individuals, not just as in our role as lawyers, but us as individuals speaking out, attending demonstrations, organizing. We have a role to play there, but also as trained lawyers, we do have specific skill sets. We do have specific experience. So it's important for us to push back and make more space for people to be able to protest and to be able to resist. In the National Lawyers Guild, we've organized to a large number of volunteer attorneys, and we provide a number of services to activists on a pro bono basis that we're doing consultations before demonstrations for people to determine what sort of level of risk they might have. We provide legal observers to attend demonstrations, to observe the police, to ensure that people's rights are being protected. We also coordinate volunteers to represent people after they're arrested, and we provide trainings there, and we provide resources so that attorneys, if they don't have any sort of experience in this area, can be trained up and learn to do this. And we also refer cases to attorneys who can handle various types of litigation, whether that's litigation regarding permits or around employment retaliation or civil rights lawsuits like 1983 lawsuits for false arrest or excessive force for people at demonstrations. So there's really a important key role for attorneys to be stepping up right now. This is always the case, but it's especially true right now where we're seeing such egregious and massive attacks on our First Amendment rights and on our legal institutions. And so it's important that lawyers of all people be stepping up to really be supporting these movements and standing in solidarity with these movements.
Well, thank you very much, Brad. You actually kind of got to my last question there about what we can do as attorneys. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add to that, but I think, this is very important information. And if we're going to be able to change the current climate, we need to make sure we're speaking up and helping those who are speaking up and standing out against injustice and inequity that they see coming out of this current administration. But I'll leave the final words to you before we do some closing remarks, if there was anything else you wanted to add.
Just echoing again the importance of this moment, that really, like you said, for us to be supporting these people that are taking to the streets, going to the parks, going to public protest. We really have a role to play there. And so if people are not sure how to get involved, reach out to the ABA Civil Rights Social Justice section, but also reach out to other organizations like the National Lawyers Guild or other groups that might be in your area that are already doing this kind of support and have an infrastructure there to figure out how to plug in and really maximize our efforts.
Thank you, Brad. We do stand at a pivotal moment in our history as a nation. Thank you for shedding some light on what's currently happening in the protest and the legal climate there, as well as things that we can do to help impact and make an impact on our nation too. To everyone who joined us today, thank you for being a part of this important dialogue. The issues we've explored are complex and challenging, but by coming together in this space like this, we are taking meaningful steps toward progress. Remember, the work doesn't stop here. It continues with the actions we take in our communities, our workplace, and within the ABA. I encourage you to stay engaged with the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice section. Please become a member if you aren't one already. Visit our website, explore upcoming events, and consider joining one of our many committees to help shape the work we're doing. You can do so at ambar.org/CRSJ. Once again, thank you for watching. Keep fighting. Together we can, and we will make a difference. Thank you.